Shadows of the Midlands, The Brickworks Betrayal, a Detective Chernin investigation, content, and legal disclaimer. This documentary contains mature themes, including violence, criminal activity, and content that some viewers may find distressing. It is only suitable for viewers 18 years and older. All names, specific locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. While based on true events, certain aspects have been altered for privacy and legal purposes. The views expressed are those of Detective Chernin and do not necessarily represent those of law enforcement agencies. This content is presented for informational and educational purposes only. Introduction. The rain lashed against the windows of my office in Birmingham Central, a relentless drumming that matched the pounding in my head. 3 a.m, and sleep was a distant memory. I'm Detective Chernin, and for 23 years, I've been the one they call when cases go cold, when the trail seems to vanish into the ether. I specialize in the unsolvable, the forgotten, the cases that haunt the halls of police stations across the Midlands. Tonight was different. The file that lay open on my desk wasn't just another cold case. It was a festering wound on the face of our community. The Brickworks Massacre, they called it in hushed tones. 4 bodies discovered in an abandoned Victorian brickworks on the outskirts of Derby 5 years ago. 4 lives extinguished like candles in a storm. No arrests, no justice, just silence and speculation. The photograph spread before me told a story of calculated violence. Forensics had long ago determined they died within minutes of each other execution style. 2 shots each, professional, clinical. The kind of methodical killing that sends shivers down even the most hardened detective's spine. But what had always troubled me most wasn't the brutality of the murders. It was the victims themselves. 4 individuals with no apparent connection. No common history. No reason to be in that derelict building together on that cold October night. Marcus Whitley, 27, small-time drug dealer from Handsworth. Eliza Carr, 32, primary school teacher from Derby's affluent north side. Vincent Thorne, 43, accountant with a spotless record. And finally, Darius Miller, 19, university student with no criminal history. 4 lives, 4 separate worlds. One gruesome end. The case had gone nowhere. Investigations stalled. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence contaminated. It had all the hallmarks of something much bigger, something that powerful people wanted buried alongside those 4 bodies. I've seen the darkness that lurks in Birmingham's shadows, the criminal networks that pulse beneath the city's skin like poisoned veins. I've confronted the gangland territories of Derby's forgotten estates. But this case, this tangled web of secrets, would test every instinct I'd honed over my career. As lightning illuminated my office in stark white flashes, I made the decision that would change everything. I would reopen the Brickworks case, follow the breadcrumbs wherever they led, no matter how dark the path or how dangerous the destination. What I couldn't know then, as I placed that first photograph back in the file, was how deep this rabbit hole would go, or how many lives, including my own, would hang in the balance before the truth finally emerged from the shadows. As I look back now, I wonder, if you knew the cost of uncovering the truth, would you still pursue it? Would you risk everything to deliver justice to those who can no longer ask for it themselves? These are the questions that haunt me still. The investigation begins. The morning after my late-night revelation brought no respite from the gnawing sense of unease. Birmingham streets glistened under clearing skies as I made my way to the archives. The building, a sterile monument to bureaucracy, housed the physical records I needed to properly begin my inquiry. "You're barking up a dead tree with this one, Chernin," Detective Inspector Wilson muttered as he led me to the evidence storage. Wilson had been part of the original investigation, one of the few officers who hadn't conveniently transferred or retired since the case went cold. His face, lined with the ravages of too many unsolved cases and too much scotch, betrayed a mixture of resignation and relief. 5 years is a long time. Witnesses forget. Evidence degrades. People move on. Not everyone moves on, Wilson, I replied, thinking of the families still waiting for answers. 4 people executed, and not a single arrest. Someone knows something. Wilson shrugged, the gesture heavy with unspoken weight. The boxes are all there, he said, pointing to a dusty corner. Good luck finding anything we missed. I sensed he wanted to say more, but held back. That hesitation told me volumes. Fear has a particular scent in our profession, subtle but unmistakable. Is there something you want to tell me, Wilson? I pressed, keeping my voice low. His eyes darted to the door, checking for listeners. Just watch yourself with this one. There were rumors back then. Nothing concrete, nothing we could prove, but... He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Birmingham Central Crime Unit received a call the day after the murders. Anonymous. Male. Said the killings were a message. Said more would follow if certain agreements weren't honored. What agreements? That's just it. We never found out. The recording mysteriously disappeared from evidence 2 days later. Official explanation was technical malfunction. His laugh was bitter. In 20 years on the force, I've never seen a malfunction that selective. Wilson left me then, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, leaving me alone with 12 boxes of evidence and a growing sense that I was scratching at something much larger than a 5-year-old quadruple homicide. For hours, I meticulously worked through each box, reconstructing the case in my mind. Forensics had found little at the scene. The killers were professionals. Shell casings from a 9mm handgun, likely fitted with a suppressor. No fingerprints. Minimal blood spatter suggesting the victims were killed elsewhere in the building and arranged in the main hall afterward. Toxicology showed all 4 had trace amounts of diazepam in their systems, enough to make them compliant but conscious. The victims' personal effects told their own stories. Marcus Whitley's phone contained cryptic text messages referencing a big opportunity in the weeks before his death. Eliza Carr's diary mentioned a new relationship, though she never named her partner. Vincent Thorne carried a USB drive that forensics had been unable to decrypt, and young Darius Miller had a train ticket to London dated for the day after his murder, a journey he would never make. What connected these 4 disparate individuals? What brought them together in that abandoned brickworks on that fateful night? I was about to close the final box when I noticed something odd about the crime scene photographs. In each image of the victims, they were positioned in a semicircle, their bodies facing inward as if gathered for a meeting that turned deadly. But in one photograph, taken from a higher angle near the building's entrance, something caught my eye, a distinct pattern in the dust on the floor. Using a magnifying glass, I studied the image more closely. The pattern wasn't random. It was a series of footprints leading from the victims to a section of wall not visible in any of the other photographs. Footprints that, according to the evidence log, had never been followed. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. Dr. Karim, it's Shernan. I need a favor. Those Brickworks murder victims from 2018, do you still have their autopsy records? Dr. Farah Karim, Birmingham's most meticulous medical examiner, had been a colleague and friend for nearly 15 years. I might, she replied cautiously, but that case was closed administratively years ago. Why the sudden interest? Call it a professional curiosity. I kept my tone light, revealing nothing of my official reinvestigation. Come by the lab tomorrow morning. I'll see what I can find. As I hung up, my gaze returned to the photograph. Those unexamined footprints represented the first tangible lead in a case that had been deliberately buried. But why? What was it about these 4 seemingly unrelated victims that warranted such a thorough cover-up? What if you uncovered evidence that powerful people wanted to remain hidden? Would you pursue it knowing the danger, or would you look away, as so many before you had done? These questions accompanied me as I drove to my next destination, the neighborhood where Marcus Whitley, the small-time dealer, had plied his trade before his murder. In my experience, the streets always remember what official records forget. Handsworth had changed in the 5 years since Whitley's death. Urban renewal projects had transformed parts of the area, but beneath the fresh paint and new shop fronts, the same undercurrents of poverty and opportunity flowed. I parked my unmarked car on Whitley's old corner and watched. After an hour, a familiar figure emerged from a betting shop across the street. Devin Lewis, mid-40s, former enforcer for the Burger Bar Boys in the early 2000s, now a community businessman with fingers in numerous legal and illegal enterprises. If anyone knew the true dynamics of Handsworth's criminal ecosystem, it was Devin. I approached him carefully, aware of the eyes watching from windows and doorways. "Devin," I called, keeping my hands visible. "Need a word." His face hardened when he recognized me. "Detective Shernan. Thought you were working those fancy West Side cases these days." "I go where the questions take me," I replied evenly. "And right now, they're pointing to Marcus Whitley." Devin's expression remained impassive, but I caught the microscopic tightening around his eyes. "Whitley's been dead 5 years. What's to know?" "That's what I'm trying to find out." Word was he had a big opportunity before he died. Something worth celebrating. Devin glanced around, then jerked his head toward a small cafe. "Not here." Inside, over strong tea that neither of us touched, Devin leaned forward. "Look, I'm telling you this because you've always been straight with people around here. Marcus wasn't just some corner boy. Month before he died, he started moving different product. Premium stuff. Way above his normal supply chain. Who was supplying him?" Devin shook his head. "That's the thing. No one knew. He wasn't getting it from any of the usual networks. But he was flush with cash, talking about moving to London, setting up something bigger. And that didn't alarm his usual suppliers? Stepping on their territory? Should've, right? But word came down, leave Whitley alone. He's protected." Devin's voice dropped even lower. Protected by someone even the heaviest hitters didn't want to cross. Did he ever mention the other victims? Eliza Carr? Vincent Thorne? Darius Miller? Devin frowned. Not the woman or the older bloke, but the student. Yeah. Marcus mentioned something about a university boy with computer skills. Said the kid was going to make them both rich. I slid a 20-pound note across the table for his tea. "If you remember anything else." "I won't." Devin cut me off firmly, standing up. "And, detective, this conversation never happened. Some questions in this city don't have safe answers." As Devin left, a text message illuminated my phone screen. "Dr. Kareem found something unusual in the Whitley autopsy. Come now." The pathology lab was a bastion of sterile logic in a case increasingly clouded by half-truths and whispers. Dr. Kareem met me at the entrance, her expression grave. "I've reviewed all 4 autopsy reports," she said, without preamble as we walked through the gleaming corridors. "And I found inconsistencies that should have been flagged years ago." In her office, she pulled up digital scans of tissue samples. All 4 victims had the same diazepam markers, yes, but look at this. She pointed to microscopic structures in the tissue. These patterns indicate repeated exposure over at least 2 weeks, not a single pre-murder dose. "They were being drugged systematically before they were killed," I murmured. "Precisely. And there's more." She switched to brain tissue samples. "These neural markers suggest cognitive manipulation consistent with certain brainwashing techniques. Whoever had these people before they died wasn't just holding them captive, they were attempting to alter their thought patterns." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Mind control? "Nothing so science fiction," Dr. Kareem clarified. "But certainly psychological conditioning. Combine regular diazepam with sleep deprivation, controlled information, and specific stimuli. You can make people extremely susceptible to suggestion." "Why wasn't this in the original reports?" Dr. Relabai. Kareem's expression hardened. "Because these tissue samples weren't processed during the original autopsy. They were marked "further analysis pending" and then apparently forgotten. I only found them because I keep my own independent records. Who ordered the analysis stopped? The request came from your department, Detective. Assistant Chief Constable Gardner's office. Gardner. The pieces were beginning to form a disturbing picture. 5 years ago, Assistant Chief Constable Michael Gardner had been in charge of major crimes. 2 years after the Brickworks case went cold, he'd retired suddenly, moving to Spain with an unexplained wealth that had raised eyebrows but no official inquiries. I thanked Dr. Kareem and left, my mind racing. 4 victims, systematically drugged and psychologically conditioned before their deaths. A high-ranking police official potentially suppressing evidence. A drug dealer suddenly moving premium product from an unknown supplier. My next stop was clear. I needed to understand the most baffling victim in this tableau, Eliza Carr, the primary school teacher from Derby's affluent North Side. What connection could she possibly have to drug dealers, accounting, and university students? As I drove toward Derby, I wondered if you discovered that someone you respected, someone in a position of authority, might be involved in something nefarious. Would you pursue that lead wherever it took you? Or would you find a reason to look away, to protect the institutions you've sworn to uphold? These questions accompanied me as the city skyline receded in my rearview mirror, and the twisted path to the truth stretched dangerously before me. Uncovering connections, Derby's northern residential district presented a stark contrast to Handsworth's struggling streets. Manicured lawns fronted substantial homes, and luxury cars lined the driveways. Eliza Carr had lived in a modest cottage on the edge of this affluence, a primary school teacher's salary stretching to afford the prestigious postal code. The cottage had new owners, now a young professional couple who knew nothing of its previous occupant or her violent end. But Eliza's neighbor, Mrs. Pemberton, had lived in the adjacent property for over 30 years and had a reputation for keeping a watchful eye on the neighborhood. "Oh yes, I remember Eliza well," Mrs. Pemberton said as she served tea in bone china cups. Her sitting room was a museum to decades past, antimacassars on every armchair, family photographs crowding every surface. Lovely girl, dedicated teacher, always had time for a chat. Did she ever seem troubled? Worried about anything? I asked, accepting a shortbread biscuit I had no intention of eating. Mrs. Pemberton's face clouded. Not initially, no, but those last few months. She hesitated. She changed. How so? It started with the car, you see. A brand new Audi. Beautiful thing. I asked how a teacher could afford such a luxury, and she laughed it off, said she'd come into some money. Then there were the late-night visitors. My interest sharpened. Visitors? Men in expensive suits. They'd arrive after dark, stay for an hour or so. Very hush-hush, I assumed. Mrs. Pemberton lowered her voice conspiratorially. A romantic entanglement with a married man. But then there was that awful business with the window. What business? Someone threw a brick through her front window. Attached was a photograph. I shouldn't have looked, but I was helping her clean up the glass, and there it was on the floor. Mrs. Pemberton leaned forward. It showed Eliza coming out of the Midland Hotel in Birmingham with a man. Distinguished-looking gentleman, much older than her. The word traitor was written across it in red. Did Eliza call the police? That's the strange thing. She insisted it was just vandals, refused to report it. The next day, she installed an elaborate security system. Cameras, alarms, the works. Far more than seemed necessary for random vandalism. When was this? About 3 weeks before what happened at the Brickworks. Mrs. Pemberton's eyes grew moist. If only she'd confided in someone. Maybe things would have turned out differently. This man in the photograph, would you recognize him if you saw him again? Mrs. Pemberton nodded slowly. I believe I would. He had a distinctive appearance. Very tall, white hair, despite not being terribly old. A scar through his right eyebrow. The description triggered a memory. a face I'd seen not in the case files, but in newspaper photographs alongside civic leaders and business moguls. Mrs. Pemberton, would you be willing to look at some photographs to identify this man? Of course, Detective. Anything to help poor Eliza rest in peace. I pulled out my tablet and searched for images of prominent Birmingham businessmen. After scrolling through several pages, Mrs. Pemberton suddenly gasped, "That's him. That's the man who was with Eliza." The face on the screen belonged to Jonathan Reeves, CEO of Meridian Development Group, one of the largest property developers in the Midlands. Reeves had been instrumental in the massive redevelopment projects, transforming Birmingham's and Derby's city centers, converting abandoned industrial sites into luxury apartments and commercial spaces, including, I suddenly realized, the area surrounding the old brickworks where the bodies had been found. I thanked Mrs. Bress as well. Pemberton, and left with a new thread to pull a thread that potentially connected Eliza Carr to powerful property interests. But what about the other victims? What was the link between a teacher possibly involved with a property magnate, a small-time drug dealer with a mysterious new supplier, an accountant, and a university student? Vincent Thorne, the accountant, became my next focus. His former employer, a mid-sized firm in Birmingham's financial district, had long since moved on, but his former supervisor, Patrick Donnelly, still worked there. Vincent was meticulous, reliable, utterly conventional, Donnelly told me in his corner office overlooking the canal, which made his resignation all the more surprising. He resigned? That wasn't in the case files, Donnelly frowned. 3 weeks before his death. Said he'd been offered a position he couldn't refuse. We assumed a competitor had headhunted him, though he was bound by confidentiality agreements not to say where. Did he handle any accounts related to property development or construction? Donnelly gave me a sharp look. As a matter of fact, yes. He was our lead accountant for several major development accounts, including Meridian. His eyes narrowed. Why do you ask? Just establishing connections, I replied neutrally. What about any accounts related to international transfers or offshore holdings? Donnelly's demeanor changed subtly, a professional mask slipping into place. I'm afraid I couldn't comment on specific client matters without a formal request from your department. His sudden reticence spoke volumes. I changed tack. Did Vincent ever mention concerns about any of the accounts he handled? Any irregularities that troubled him? Detective Sherman, Donnelly said carefully, Vincent was a professional who understood the importance of client confidentiality. If he had concerns, he would have raised them through appropriate channels, and yet he resigned suddenly for a job he couldn't discuss. Donnelly stood, indicating our meeting was over. If there's nothing else, I have a client call in 5 minutes. As I left the building, my phone rang an unknown number. Detective Sherman, I answered. You're asking questions about Vincent Thorne. The voice was male, deliberately disguised. Birmingham Canal, behind the mailbox, 20 minutes. Come alone or don't come. The call ended. Potential trap? Possibly. But in cases like this, calculated risks were sometimes necessary. I messaged my location and destination to a trusted colleague as insurance, then headed for the meeting point. The canal path behind Birmingham's premier shopping destination was relatively quiet at this hour. High-end restaurants and bars lined the waterfront, their evening crowds still hours away. I positioned myself with clear sightlines in multiple directions and waited. At precisely the appointed time, a figure emerged from the shadows of a pedestrian bridge, male, early 30s, nervous energy evident in every movement. "Are you alone?" he called softly. I raised my empty hands, as requested. He approached cautiously, constantly scanning our surroundings. Up close, I recognized him as one of the junior accountants from Vincent Thorne's firm, though I couldn't recall his name. "I'm Lewis," he supplied, as if reading my thoughts. "I worked under Vincent. I saw you at the office today. Why the cloak and dagger approach, Lewis?" He glanced nervously over his shoulder. Because Vincent wasn't just my boss, he was my friend. And what happened to him wasn't random. I'm listening. Lewis pulled a flash drive from his pocket. 3 days before Vincent resigned, he asked me to help him analyze some financial data, off the books, after hours. He wouldn't say where the data came from, just that he needed a second pair of eyes. What kind of data? Property transactions. Dozens of them, across Birmingham and Derby. On the surface, they looked legitimate, various companies acquiring derelict industrial sites for redevelopment. But when we mapped them against future city planning documents, the acquisitions anticipated zoning changes and infrastructure projects that hadn't been publicly announced. I finished, seeing the pattern emerge. Lewis nodded. Exactly. Someone was buying worthless property that would skyrocket in value once certain civic projects were announced. The profit margins were astronomical. Insider trading on a massive scale. That's what Vincent thought too. But it got worse. We traced the ownership of the acquiring company's shell corporations within shell corporations. But at the center of it all was a holding company called Pentacor Group. Owned by? That's just it, we couldn't determine ownership. The trail led offshore to the Cayman Islands, then disappeared. But what we did find were payments from Pentacor to various accounts, including one belonging to Assistant Chief Constable Gardner. My blood ran cold. Gardner again, the same official who had apparently suppressed evidence in the murder investigation. Vincent was going to take what we found to the National Crime Agency, Lewis continued. He said local authorities couldn't be trusted. The next day, he resigned, suddenly. 3 weeks later, he was dead. And you never came forward with this information? Fear flashed across Lewis's face. The day after Vincent's body was found, I received this. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph his wife and young daughter walking into their home, clearly taken with a telephoto lens. No message accompanied it. None was needed. I've lived with the guilt for 5 years, Lewis said, his voice breaking. My family moved to my parents' place in Scotland last week. Once they were safe, I knew I had to do something. He handed me the flash drive. Everything Vincent and I found is on here. Names, dates, transactions, connections. Use it to find who killed him. This could put you in danger, Lewis. I'm leaving the country tomorrow. New job in Canada. One-way ticket. His smile was grim. Better late than never for doing the right thing, yeah? As Lewis disappeared back into the shadows, I pocketed the flash drive, my mind racing to connect the emerging dots. Property development. Insider information. Police corruption. Mind-altering drugs. 4 seemingly unrelated victims. But what about the final victim? What role did 19-year-old university student Darius Miller play in this deadly equation? Darius had been studying computer science at Birmingham University, living in a student flat near the campus. His former roommate, now a graduate software engineer, agreed to meet me at a pub in the university district. Darius was brilliant. Jason Kumar told me over pints neither of us touched. Top of our class in cybersecurity and data analysis. Companies were already trying to recruit him, even though he was only in second year. Was he involved in anything unusual in the weeks before his death? New friends? Unexplained income? Late-night projects? Jason hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. About a month before he died, Darius started working on something he wouldn't talk about. Said it was a private consulting job that paid cash. He swore me to secrecy. But I was his roommate. I saw things. He was working with encrypted databases, property records, financial transactions. Once, I walked in while he was on a call, and he was saying something about definitive proof of collusion. When he saw me, he ended the call immediately. Did he ever mention names? Reeves? Meridian Development? Pentacor? Jason shook his head. Not to me, but he paused, considering there was a name on a sticky note by his computer. I remember because it was odd, Operation Chimney Sweep. Does that mean anything? It didn't, but I filed it away. One more thing. Did Darius know any of the other victims? Marcus Whitley, Vincent Thorne? Eliza Carr? Not Whitley or Thorne, at least not that he mentioned, but Eliza Carr. Jason frowned in concentration. Yeah, that name does sound familiar. I think she might have been Darius's contact for whatever he was working on. He mentioned meeting Eliza for progress updates a couple of times. The pieces were starting to form a clearer picture. Darius Miller, computer expert, possibly hired to analyze the same financial and property data that Vincent Thorne had uncovered. Eliza Carr, somehow connected to property developer Jonathan Reeves, serving as an intermediary. Marcus Whitley, suddenly selling high-grade product from an unknown source, mentioning a university boy with computer skills. But what tied them all together? And why were they killed? I was deep in these thoughts when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Stop digging or you're next. Final warning. Attached was a photograph taken less than an hour ago, me standing on the canal path talking to Lewis. I was being watched. If you knew someone was monitoring your every move, threatening your life for pursuing the truth, would you back away? Or would you push harder, knowing you might be closing in on something they desperately needed to keep hidden? As I left the pub, these questions weighed on me, along with the growing certainty that I was unraveling a conspiracy that had already claimed at least 4 lives and would claim more if the truth remained buried. What I couldn't know then was that the most shocking revelation was yet to come, a twist that would change everything I thought I knew about the Brickworks massacre and the shadowy figures behind it. The unexpected twist. The threatening text message made one thing clear. Whoever was behind the Brickworks killings knew I was reopening the case and had the resources to monitor my movements in real time. This wasn't the work of common criminals. This was organized, professional, and connected. I needed a secure location to examine Lewis's flash drive away from prying eyes. My flat wasn't safe, my office at the station even less so. I drove to an old safe house in Digbeth that hadn't been used by the department in years, but that I knew was still maintained by a retired detective inspector who owed me a favor. The converted warehouse space was sparse, but functional: a fold-out desk, secure internet connection, and most importantly, no windows and a steel-reinforced door. I plugged the flash drive into a clean laptop with no connection to police networks. What unfolded on the screen confirmed my worst suspicions and revealed depths to the conspiracy I hadn't imagined. Vincent Thorne and Darius Miller had independently uncovered evidence of one of the largest corruption schemes in Midland's history. Penacor Group, the mysterious offshore company, had been systematically acquiring derelict industrial properties across Birmingham and Derby for years. These seemingly worthless properties would suddenly multiply in value when city planning announcements designated them for redevelopment with public funds for infrastructure. The pattern was clear. Someone at the highest levels of city government was leaking confidential planning information to Penacor before public announcements. The company would acquire the properties for pennies, then sell to developers like Meridian at enormous profit once the public plans were announced. But that wasn't all. The documents revealed a complex web of payoffs to key officials, planning officers, council members, and police officials, including regular payments to Assistant Chief Constable Gardner. These weren't small bribes. They were life-changing sums funneled through offshore accounts. Most disturbing was a folder labeled Operation Chimney Sweep, the same phrase on Darius's sticky note. It contained details of a massive development plan for the area surrounding the old brickworks where the bodies were found. The plan involved converting dozens of historic buildings into luxury flats and commercial spaces, potentially generating billions in profit. But there was a problem. Several of the buildings had historical protection orders that prevented redevelopment. The documents detailed a systematic campaign to have those protections removed, including donations to key Heritage Committee members. And there, in a subfolder marked personnel, were files on all 4 victims, plus 2 names I didn't recognize. Each file contained surveillance photographs, personal information, and a bizarre evaluation titled Susceptibility Assessment. These weren't just victims, they were targets who had been studied, evaluated, and selected. But why these specific individuals? What did they know that made them dangerous? I opened Marcus Whitley's file first. The surveillance notes painted a different picture than the small-time dealer in the official reports. According to these documents, Whitley had been a trusted distributor for a new synthetic drug called Clarity, a substance that enhanced mental focus while being nearly undetectable in standard toxicology screens. The distribution network map showed Whitley's territory centered around Birmingham City Council offices and the headquarters of several architectural and planning firms involved in the city's redevelopment projects. His clients weren't street addicts, they were professionals, officials, and executives. Whitley had been recruited for this operation because of his existing drug network, but the notes indicated he had exceeded operational parameters and begun independent investigation of product source and client identities. A final notation, dated 3 days before his death, read, "Subject compromised. Containment required." Eliza Carr's file was even more revelatory. She hadn't been having an affair with Jonathan Reeves. She had been his unwitting source of information. As a primary school teacher, she taught the children of several high-ranking city officials and planning committee members. The surveillance showed her being approached by a woman named Catherine Wells, ostensibly a parent but actually a Pentacore operative. Wells had recruited Carr for what she claimed was corporate intelligence work, simply reporting conversations overheard at school functions, parent meetings, and social events where officials might discuss upcoming plans in a relaxed setting. Carr, struggling with debt, had accepted the seemingly harmless arrangement. But the notes indicated she had grown suspicious when she realized the harmless gossip she was reporting was being used for major financial plays. The final entry stated she had contacted Vincent Thorne after finding his name in Wells's notebook, seeking to understand what she had become involved in. Vincent Thorne's file confirmed what Lewis had told me. As an accountant with access to multiple development accounts, he had identified the pattern of property acquisitions and traced them to Pentacore. The surveillance showed him meeting with Eliza Carr and later with contacts at the National Crime Agency. His susceptibility assessment noted he was resistant to conventional pressure tactics and requires specialized handling. Finally, Darius Miller's file revealed why a university student had been dragged into this deadly web. Miller hadn't been randomly selected, he had been specifically recruited by Eliza Carr after her meeting with Thorne. With his exceptional data analysis skills, he had been tasked with compiling the definitive evidence package linking Pentacore to the corrupt officials and the property scheme. The final entry in his file, dated the day before the murders, was chilling. Subject has completed data compilation. Extraction of package and containment of all compromised assets scheduled for 22:00 tomorrow at Site 37 Brickworks. They hadn't been killed because they knew too much. They had been killed because they were working together to expose the entire operation. But the most shocking revelation came in the folder labeled Implementation Team. There, alongside operational notes for the Brickworks containment, was a name that made my blood freeze. Detective Sergeant Alan Mercer. Mercer had been the lead detective on the original Brickworks investigation. The man responsible for gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and pursuing leads had been working for the very people who committed the murders. No wonder the case had gone nowhere. It had been sabotaged from within, from the very beginning. As this realization sank in, I heard a soft click from the direction of the door. I wasn't alone. Acting on instinct, I dove to the side just as the first bullet shattered the laptop screen, sending plastic fragments flying across the room. I rolled behind a metal filing cabinet as 2 more shots punched into the wall where I had been sitting. Should have heeded the warning, Shernan, a familiar voice called from the doorway. Some cases are meant to stay closed. Detective Sergeant Alan Mercer stepped into the room, service pistol trained on my position, his face a mask of cold determination. 5 years without a hitch, he continued, moving sideways to get a better angle. Then you start digging, talking to witnesses we'd already handled. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? We? I called from behind the cabinet, desperately searching for an escape route or weapon. You mean Pentacore? Or is it Reeves who signs your bonus checks? Mercer laughed. You still don't get it, do you? Reeves is just another player, another puppet. Pentacore goes much higher than some property developer. Then enlighten me, Alan, before you add another body to your count. Afraid that's not on the agenda. He fired again, the bullet ricocheting off the metal cabinet. But I'll give you one courtesy, colleague to colleague. It wasn't personal with Whitley, Carr, and the others. They made choices that forced our hand, just like you've done. As he spoke, I noticed an electrical junction box on the wall behind him. If I could hit it, it might short the lights. Just tell me one thing, I called, trying to keep him talking while I searched for a projectile. The other two names in the files, Jason Liang and Petra Novak. Are they still alive? Mercer paused, genuine surprise in his voice. How do you know those names? Same way I know about Operation Chimney Sweep. Same way I know about the susceptibility assessments in the Clarity drug program. My hand closed around a heavy metal paperweight on the floor beside me. You found Thorne's drive, Mercer realized, tension creeping into his voice. Where is it? Who else has seen it? It's somewhere safe, I lied. Set to release to media outlets across the country if I don't check in every 24 hours. So maybe shooting me isn't your best option right now. Mercer was silent for a moment, recalculating. You're bluffing. Am I? You've been watching me for days. You saw me meet with Lewis, with Dr. Kareem, with Jason Kumar. Did you also see where I went after that? Who else I might have shared that drive with? In the momentary hesitation that followed, I made my move. I hurled the paperweight at the junction box with all my strength. The impact shorted the circuits, plunging the room into darkness except for the red glow of emergency lights. Mercer fired blindly in my direction as I launched myself toward a maintenance door I'd noticed earlier. Bullets splintered the wood around me as I crashed through the door into a service corridor. I ran full tilt through the dark hallway, hearing Mercer's footsteps close behind. The corridor ended at a stairwell leading down to the building's basement level. I took the stairs 3 at a time, nearly falling as I rounded the landing. The basement was a maze of storage rooms and utility spaces. I ducked into a boiler room, pulling the door closed behind me as silently as possible. Seconds later, Mercer's footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. You're only prolonging the inevitable, Shernan, he called, his voice bouncing off the concrete walls. Even if you escape today, we'll find you. We have resources you can't imagine. I held my breath as his footsteps approached the boiler room door, then paused. The handle turned slowly. I gripped a heavy pipe wrench from a workbench, preparing to fight for my life. The door opened a crack, and I tensed to strike. Suddenly, a crash sounded from somewhere across the basement. Mercer's attention diverted, and he moved away toward the noise, his footsteps receding. I waited, counting to 30, then slipped out and moved in the opposite direction, finding an emergency exit that opened onto a back alley. The cool night air hit my face as I emerged, senses heightened, scanning for threats. The alley appeared empty, but I knew better than to trust appearances. I kept to the shadows, moving quickly toward the main road where I'd have a better chance of losing myself in the evening crowds. My phone was still in the safe house, likely destroyed. The flash drive with all the evidence was in my pocket, but Mercer and whoever he worked for knew I had it. I needed a secure location and allies I could trust, both in increasingly short supply. More importantly, I needed to find Jason Liang and Petra Novak before Mercer's people did. If their files were included with the 4 victims, they were almost certainly on the same target list. 5 years had passed since the Brickworks killings. Were they still alive? In hiding? Or were they unwittingly going about their lives with targets on their backs? As I flagged down a taxi, giving it a destination halfway across the city from where I actually intended to go, I confronted the gravity of what I'd uncovered. This wasn't just about 4 murders. This was about systematic corruption reaching to the highest levels of civic governance, police operations, and corporate power. A conspiracy that had already killed to protect itself, and wouldn't hesitate to do so again. If you found yourself facing such entrenched corruption, with powerful forces aligned against you and few allies you could trust, what would you do? Would you go public with what you knew even without knowing all the players? Or would you work in the shadows, gathering more evidence, even as the danger to yourself and others increased with each passing hour? These questions haunted me as I vanished into Birmingham's night, a detective turned fugitive, hunted by the very institution I had sworn to serve. What I couldn't know then was that the conspiracy reached even deeper than I had imagined, and that the most dangerous revelation and my greatest ally was yet to emerge from the shadows. The climactic revelation. The rain had returned by the time I reached my destination, a converted factory loft in Digbeth's creative quarter belonging to Mira Chen, a former investigative journalist who now ran an independent data security consultancy. If anyone could help me make sense of the evidence on the flash drive while keeping me off the grid, it was Mira. "Jesus, Shernan, you look like hell," were her first words as she ushered me inside, quickly securing 3 separate locks behind us. Her loft was a curious blend of cutting-edge technology and vintage furniture, walls covered with investigative flowcharts and news clippings. "Someone just tried to kill me," I replied bluntly, still catching my breath. "Detective Sergeant Alan Mercer." Mira's expression hardened. "The lead detective on the Brickworks case? The one you always said seemed to be deliberately mishandling evidence? The very same. Turns out he's been working for the people behind the killings all along." I pulled the flash drive from my pocket. I need to access what's on here without being traced. Mira took the drive, examining it carefully. "Give me 15 minutes to set up a secure environment. In the meantime, you should clean up and change. There's a shower through there, and some of my brother's clothes should fit you." 20 minutes later, in fresh clothes with my face washed clean of the grime from my escape, I watched as Mira worked her technical magic. She had transferred the drive's contents to an air-gapped system, a computer never connected to any network, and was methodically exploring its contents. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, scrolling through financial records. "The level of corruption here. It's systematic, institutional. Can you find anything on Jason Liang or Petra Novak? They were named in the files alongside the 4 victims, but I didn't have time to read their dossiers before Mercer showed up." Mira typed rapidly, navigating through folders. "Here, Jason Liang, civil engineer with the Birmingham City Planning Department. Specialized in infrastructure assessment." She opened his file, revealing surveillance photographs and detailed personal information. According to this, he identified structural problems with several heritage buildings that Pentacore wanted redeveloped. Let me guess, problems that would make demolition necessary rather than preservation. Exactly. But Liang wouldn't sign off on the assessments, said the buildings were structurally sound with proper maintenance. She continued reading. "They tried bribing him, then blackmail, but he wouldn't budge. He was scheduled for processing at the Brickworks along with the others, but he called in sick that day, food poisoning." "So he missed his own execution by chance," I said, feeling a chill at the clinical way these murders had been planned. "What about Petra Novak?" Mira opened the second file. "Petra Novak, historical preservation consultant. Expert in Victorian industrial architecture." The photographs showed a woman in her 30s with striking features and an intense gaze. She was cataloging the historical significance of the buildings Pentacore wanted demolished. According to this, she discovered evidence that one of the Pentacore shell companies had deliberately neglected maintenance on protected buildings to accelerate deterioration, making demolition more likely to be approved. I filled in. "Was she also scheduled for the Brickworks?" Mira nodded grimly. "Yes, but she never arrived. The notes indicate she was unexpectedly accompanied by legal counsel when they attempted to detain her. The operation was aborted. So both potential victims survived by sheer luck," I mused. "Do we have current whereabouts?" "Nothing in these files, but they're 5 years old." Mira turned to another computer, and began typing. Let me see what I can find. While she worked, I continued examining the Pentacor files. The scale of the operation was staggering. Not just property manipulation, but systematic infiltration of civic institutions. The documents detailed how key officials had been compromised through a combination of bribery, blackmail, and in some cases, pharmaceutical manipulation using the Clarity drug. Most disturbing was a section titled Law Enforcement Management, which listed over a dozen police officers across multiple jurisdictions who had been recruited, compromised, or manipulated into supporting Pentacor operations. Mercer was there, as was former Assistant Chief Constable Gardner, but so were officers I had worked with for years, people I had trusted implicitly. Got something on Liang, Mira announced suddenly. After leaving the Birmingham Planning Department, he moved to Glasgow, works as a lecturer in civil engineering at the university there. And Novak? Mira frowned. That's harder. No social media presence, no public records after 2018. It's like she vanished, or she's hiding, which would be smart if she knew people wanted her dead, I observed. Can you find any connection between Liang and Novak? Did they know each other? Let me check. Mira cross-referenced the files, then sat back in surprise. Yes, they did. They both served on the Midlands Heritage Conservation Committee. And there's something else. She opened another document. According to this assessment, Novak had been developing a comprehensive historical archive of Birmingham's industrial architecture, including ownership records dating back to the Victorian era. Why would that matter to Pentacor? Because a new voice said from the doorway, those records prove none of this is about simple property development. It's about what lies beneath the properties. I whirled around, instinctively reaching for a weapon I didn't have, to find a woman standing in the doorway to Mira's kitchen, the same woman from the photographs, Petra Novak. How did you get in here? Mira demanded, equally startled. Your security system is excellent, but your bathroom window latch is faulty, Novak replied calmly, stepping fully into the room. She wore practical dark clothing, her hair shorter than in the surveillance photos, but her intense gaze unchanged. I've been watching this building since you arrived, Detective Sherman. I needed to be sure you weren't working with them. You've been monitoring me? I asked, mind racing. For how long? Since you started asking questions about the Brickworks case, Novak moved further into the room, her posture suggesting military or tactical training I hadn't expected from a historical preservationist. When you visited Eliza Carr's neighbor, I knew you were getting close to the truth. I've been waiting 5 years for someone honest to reopen this case. You knew Eliza Carr? I recruited her, after a fashion. Regret flashed across Novak's face. When I realized what Pentacor was doing, I needed allies with different areas of expertise. Vincent Thorne could follow the money. Darius Miller could analyze the data. Eliza could help us understand who was involved through her connections to city officials' families. And Marcus Whitley? He was our unexpected ally. He realized the Clarity drug he was distributing was being used to manipulate city officials, and came to Darius with his concerns. He was braver than his reputation suggested. I studied Novak carefully, still not fully trusting her sudden appearance. You've been in hiding for 5 years. Why show yourself now? Because you found what we were assembling, she said, gesturing to the screens displaying the Pentacor files. What got my friends killed? But you still don't understand what it all means, what Pentacor is really after. Which is, have you ever heard of the Birmingham Mineral Railway? The question seemed tangential, but I played along, vaguely. Victorian-era railway network for moving raw materials, mostly abandoned by the 1960s. Novak nodded. The visible railway, yes. But there was another network beneath a system of tunnels and chambers constructed in secret by industrialist Joseph Chamberlain and a consortium of Victorian manufacturers. They called it the Mineral Reserve. Mira looked skeptical. Secret underground chambers? That sounds like urban legend. Most people think so. which is exactly what Chamberlain intended, Novak replied. But my historical research uncovered documentation proving its existence sealed municipal records, private correspondence, engineering diagrams. The mineral reserve was created to stockpile strategic materials, coal, iron, copper, tin, in case of national emergency or trade disruption. That was 150 years ago, I pointed out. What does it have to do with Pentacor? Everything. Novak moved to Mira's computer, typing rapidly to pull up a map of Birmingham. The brickworks and every single property Pentacor has acquired sits above the mineral reserve network, not because they want to build luxury flats, but because they're after what's still down there. Victorian stockpiles of coal and iron? I asked dubiously. Hardly seems worth killing for in the 21st century. Not coal and iron, Novak said, her voice dropping. Chamberlain's consortium didn't just store common industrial materials. They also secured strategic metals that were rare even then: platinum, palladium, rhodium, and one substance they didn't fully understand the value of at the time, uranium ore. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You're saying there's uranium under Birmingham? That's what Pentacor is after? Among other things, yes. My research suggests at least 30 tons of uranium ore was stored in the deepest chambers, forgotten as the original consortium members died and the records were sealed. In today's market, that alone would be worth billions, especially if acquired without regulatory oversight. But surely building works would uncover these tunnels, Mira objected. Someone would notice excavations or unusual construction activities. That's the brilliance of it, Novak explained. Pentecor's developments all include deep parking structures or geothermal energy systems requiring extensive excavation. Perfect cover for accessing the mineral reserve network. And with compromised officials approving the permits and inspections, no one would ever know what they're really extracting. I finished, the full scope of the conspiracy finally becoming clear. But this still seems like an elaborate operation for one company, even for billions in rare metals. Novak's expression darkened. That's because Pentacor isn't a company. It's a cover for a state-sponsored resource acquisition program. The shell corporations, the offshore accounts, they all trace back to foreign intelligence operations. You're talking about espionage, I said slowly, the pieces clicking into place. Resource espionage, precisely. In a world increasingly dependent on rare metals for everything from smartphones to military applications, untraceable sources of these materials are invaluable. What better source than forgotten Victorian stockpiles buried beneath a British industrial city? The scale of what we were facing suddenly expanded dramatically. This wasn't just corrupt local officials and greedy developers. This was international in scope, with resources and reach far beyond what I had imagined. The 4 murders, I said, returning to my original investigation. They weren't just to silence people who knew about property fraud. They were to prevent exposure of a foreign intelligence operation on British soil. Yes, Novak confirmed grimly. My friends died because they accidentally uncovered something far bigger than corruption. They stumbled onto a national security threat. We need to take this to higher authorities immediately, I insisted. My 5, GCHQ. That's exactly what Vincent was trying to do when he was killed, Novak countered. The problem is, we don't know how high the infiltration goes. The moment we approach official channels, Pentacor will know, and any evidence and witnesses will disappear. She was right, and that realization sent ice through my veins. We had uncovered a conspiracy so vast and complex that we couldn't trust the very institutions designed to address such threats. So, what's your plan? I asked. You've been working on this for 5 years. You must have a strategy. I do, Novak acknowledged. But first, we need to secure Jason Liang. If they know you've discovered the files, they'll assume you've identified the surviving targets. Jason will be in immediate danger. Mira, who had been quietly working at her computer during our conversation, looked up sharply. I think it may be too late. I've been monitoring police communications. There's an incident reported at Glasgow University, a suspected attack on a faculty member. No name released yet. We need to move, Novak said urgently. If they've already gone after Jason, we're running out of time. The chimney sweep operation is accelerating. Chimney sweep, I repeated, remembering the term from the files. What exactly is it? The final phase, Novak explained grimly. Complete acquisition of all properties above the mineral reserve, removal of all remaining obstacles, human or regulatory, and extraction of all materials within 12 months. According to the timeline I found, it's scheduled to begin within days. The stakes couldn't be higher. 4 people were already dead. Potentially billions in strategic resources hung in the balance. And somewhere in the shadows, powerful forces were preparing to eliminate anyone who stood in their way, including us. What's our next move, I asked, committing myself fully to this dangerous path. We need proof that can't be buried or dismissed, Novak replied. And there's only one place to get it. We need to access the mineral reserve itself, document what's there and what's already been taken. You know how to get in? I've spent 5 years mapping entry points based on historical records. There's one they don't know about underneath the original Chambers manufacturing building in Digbeth. It's scheduled for demolition next week. So, we have days, at most, I concluded, the pressure mounting. And we're up against professional killers with police connections and foreign intelligence resources. Welcome to my world, Novak said with grim humor. Still want to know the truth, detective? The truth. 4 murdered innocents. A conspiracy spanning decades. Foreign operatives stealing strategic resources from beneath our city. Corrupt officials betraying their oaths and their country. If you walked away now, Mira interjected softly, no one would blame you. This is bigger than one detective can handle. She was right, of course. The rational choice would be to disappear, to save myself from the fate that had befallen Vincent, Eliza, Darius, and Marcus. But then their killers would go unpunished, their plans would proceed, and more innocent people would suffer. I'm in, I said firmly, whatever it takes. Novak nodded, something like respect flickering in her eyes. Then we moved tonight. The underground awaits. In that moment, I understood the full weight of the choice I was making, stepping away from the structured world of police procedure into a shadowy battle against forces far more powerful than I had ever confronted before. If you discovered a conspiracy so vast that it involved foreign intelligence services, corrupt officials at the highest levels, and billions in stolen resources, would you risk everything to expose it? Or would you recognize the limits of your power and walk away? These questions echoed in my mind as we prepared to descend literally and figuratively into the darkness beneath Birmingham, a darkness that had already claimed 4 lives and threatened to claim many more, including our own. What I couldn't know then was that the final revelation waiting in those Victorian tunnels would be the most shocking of all, one that would force me to question everything I thought I knew about the case, about Novak, and about myself. Descent into darkness. The Chambers manufacturing building stood like a Victorian sentinel in the heart of Digbeth red brick and iron, weathered by centuries of industrial smoke and Midlands rain. Demolition equipment surrounded the site, ready to erase another piece of Birmingham's industrial heritage within days. We approached under cover of darkness, Novak leading with the confidence of someone who had planned this operation for years. Mira had stayed behind, coordinating our movements remotely through encrypted communications and monitoring police channels for any sign we'd been detected. The building's been empty for months, Novak explained as we slipped through a gap in the perimeter fencing. Pentacore's subsidiary acquired it last year, but they haven't started preliminary excavation for the reserve access yet. They're scheduled to begin after demolition next week. How can you be certain? I asked, keeping my voice low as we moved through shadows toward a rear entrance. Because I've been monitoring their operation timeline from the beginning. She produced a small pry bar and worked on a boarded-up service entrance. That's how I knew when to gather evidence, when to contact the others. and when to disappear after they were killed. Novak paused, turning to face me. In the dim moonlight, I could see a flash of raw emotion cross her face. I should have been there that night. I would have been, if not for a last-minute complication. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. "You've been carrying that guilt for 5 years, I observed. "Along with the responsibility to finish what we started," she replied, returning to the door. "To make their deaths mean something." The boards gave way with a muffled crack, revealing a dark corridor beyond. Novak produced powerful flashlights for both of us, the beams cutting through decades of dust and cobwebs. "The main factory floor is through there," she indicated, "but we need the basement level." The original access point to the mineral reserve was disguised as a coal storage area. We moved cautiously through the abandoned building, our flashlights revealing glimpses of Victorian industrial grandeur, soaring ceilings, cast-iron columns, massive windows now boarded and broken. Despite the mission's urgency, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss that such architectural heritage was slated for destruction. "Here," Novak said eventually, illuminating a heavy iron door set into the floor. "This leads to the lower levels." The door groaned as we lifted it, revealing stone steps descending into absolute darkness. The air that wafted up was cool and strangely dry, with a metallic undertone. "From this point on, we're effectively in uncharted territory," Novak cautioned. "The historical records describe the general layout, but details are deliberately obscured." Chamberlain and his consortium wanted these reserves to remain secret, even from most of their own workers. We descended the stone steps, the sounds of our movements echoing in the confined space. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a large stone chamber that might once have stored coal, but now stood empty save for decades of dust. Novak moved with purpose toward the far wall, examining the stonework carefully. "The access should be here." She pressed against a seemingly ordinary section of wall, and with a grinding sound that made my skin crawl, a portion of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow tunnel beyond. "Victorian engineering," Novak remarked with grudging admiration. "Still functioning after all this time." The tunnel was tall enough to stand in, but narrow enough that we had to proceed single file. The walls were lined with precision-cut stone blocks, the floor worn smooth by feet that had last traversed it perhaps a century ago. "How far does this extend?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the confined space. "According to my research, the mineral reserve network extends beneath most of central Birmingham, over 15 miles of tunnels and chambers at various depths. This particular passage should connect to one of the main distribution hubs about half a mile from here." We continued in silence for several minutes, the tunnel gradually descending deeper beneath the city. Occasionally, smaller passages branched off, but Novak kept us on the main route, consulting a hand-drawn map at regular intervals. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber that took my breath away. Our flashlights couldn't reach the ceiling, but they revealed massive brick archways, iron supports, and a floor large enough to accommodate a small warehouse. The space had a cathedral-like quality, a temple to industrial ambition hidden beneath the unsuspecting city. "The main distribution hub," Novak announced, her voice echoing. "From here, materials would be moved to specific storage chambers depending on type and strategic importance. But something was wrong. As our flashlights swept the chamber, we could see clear signs of recent activity, modern equipment, fresh tool marks on ancient brick, power cables running along the floor. "Someone's been here," I stated the obvious, moving toward a sophisticated winch system mounted near one of the far archways. "Pentacore," Novak confirmed grimly. "They've found this access point. We need to move quickly to the high-value chambers before they're completely emptied." She led us through the main chamber to a narrower passage marked with faded Victorian lettering, "Special Reserves Authorized Personnel Only." This tunnel was different, reinforced with iron, with what appeared to be primitive but effective security measures. A heavy iron gate blocked our path, but it stood partially open, the ancient locking mechanism broken by modern tools. Beyond the gate, The passage descended steeply via iron staircases that spiraled into deeper darkness. The air grew noticeably cooler, and that metallic scent intensified. "We're approaching the high-security storage," Novak explained as we carefully navigated the ancient stairs, where the most valuable materials were kept. After descending what felt like hundreds of feet, we emerged into another chamber, smaller than the distribution hub, but more carefully constructed. Here, the walls were lined with iron shelving, much of it now empty. But what remained made my heart race. Dozens of wooden crates stamped with faded markings indicating contents and origin. Novak moved immediately to examine the markings, her expression growing more intense with each crate she checked. "They've taken most of the platinum and palladium," she reported, "but there's still rhodium here. And?" She moved to a section at the back of the chamber, partially concealed behind modern tarps. "Yes, the uranium ore. They've started to move it, but most is still here." I approached cautiously, mindful of potential radiation, but Novak shook her head. "It's low-grade ore, relatively safe in its current form. The real value is in processing it." I examined one of the crates, marveling at the foresight of Victorian industrialists who had stockpiled materials they couldn't fully utilize, but somehow knew would be valuable to future generations. "We need to document everything," I said, pulling out the specialized camera Mira had provided. "Irrefutable evidence of what's here and who's been accessing it." As I began photographing the chamber and its contents, Novak moved to a modern equipment station in the corner, examining documents left behind by the Pentacore operatives. "They're accelerating the extraction timeline," she called over, rifling through papers. "Originally planned for 12 months, now compressed to 6. They're concerned about..." She paused, reading more carefully. "About increased official scrutiny following the Glasgow incident. Jason Liang," I realized with a sinking feeling. If they've hurt him, there could be an official investigation that might accidentally expose their operation. Exactly. They need to extract everything of value and erase all evidence before that happens. She continued scanning documents. "According to this, they've already removed approximately 60% of the platinum and palladium and 20% of the rhodium. The uranium extraction is scheduled to begin next week, immediately after the chamber's building demolition provides cover for increased activity." I finished photographing the storage area and joined Novak at the equipment station. "This is enough to prove what they're doing, but we still need to identify who's behind Pentacore. Without that, we're just exposing a criminal operation, not the full conspiracy." Novak hesitated, then pulled a folded document from her pocket. "I've been saving this. It's from Vincent's original investigation, a shipping manifest for the extracted materials. It details the transportation route and final destination." I examined the document carefully. The materials were being shipped through a complex series of intermediaries, ultimately bound for a research facility outside St. Petersburg. "Russia?" I asked, surprised. I was expecting China, given their hunger for rare metals. That was my assumption too, Novak admitted, but Vincent traced the operation to a Russian military intelligence unit specializing in resource acquisition. They've been planning this for decades, identifying historical stockpiles, creating cover companies, compromising local officials. Birmingham is just one of several operations worldwide. As the scope of the conspiracy became clear, a new sound reached us, faint but unmistakable. Voices and footsteps from the direction we had come. "Someone's coming," I whispered, immediately dousing my flashlight. Novak did the same, plunging us into total darkness. "There's another way out," Novak whispered back, taking my arm to guide me. "A maintenance tunnel that connects to the old sewer system. This way." We moved as quietly as possible toward the back of the chamber, Novak navigating from memory. Behind us, the voices grew louder, accompanied by the beams of powerful flashlights sweeping the main passage. Regular inspection wasn't scheduled until tomorrow. A male voice echoed down the tunnel. "Someone's been here recently." "Secure the strategic materials," another voice ordered. "Then check all secondary exits. No one leaves." Novak found what she was looking for, a narrow maintenance shaft barely wide enough for a person, concealed behind storage racks. "In here," she urged, pushing me toward the opening. Quickly, I squeezed into the shaft, Novak following close behind. The passage was claustrophobically tight, forcing us to crawl rather than walk. Behind us, flashlight beams penetrated the storage chamber we'd just left. "Movement detected at the west maintenance shaft," a voice called out, followed by the unmistakable sound of firearms being readied. Pursuing. We crawled faster, the shaft gradually sloping upward. After what felt like an eternity in the suffocating darkness, the passage widened enough to crouch, then eventually to stand. "Where does this lead?" I gasped, muscles screaming from the confined movement. "Victorian Sewer Junction, about a quarter-mile ahead," Novak replied, her breathing equally labored. "From there, we can access a maintenance entrance near the old jewelry quarter." Behind us, sounds of pursuit echoed through the shaft, multiple people, moving with professional efficiency. These weren't local police or private security. Their coordination and silence marked them as something more dangerous. We pushed on, the maintenance tunnel eventually opening into a larger brick-lined sewer tunnel, mercifully dry due to recent infrastructure updates. Novak paused at a junction, consulting her mental map. "Left here, then second right," she instructed. "There should be an access ladder about 300 meters ahead." As we turned left, a beam of light cut through the darkness from the passage behind us, accompanied by the distinctive red dot of a laser sight dancing on the wall near my head. "Down!" Novak shouted, shoving me roughly to the side as gunfire erupted, bullets impacting the brickwork where I had stood moments before. We scrambled forward, running crouched as more shots followed, echoing deafeningly in the confined space. "They're not trying to capture us," I realized aloud. "They're shooting to kill." "That's what happens when you threaten a billion-pound operation," Novak replied grimly. "Take the next right." We turned into another tunnel, this one narrower and lower, forcing us back into a crouch. The sounds of pursuit receded slightly, but didn't disappear. "Almost there," Novak encouraged, as the tunnel began to rise more steeply. "The access point should be just ahead." Finally, we saw a maintenance ladder leading up to what appeared to be a standard utility cover. Freedom was tantalizingly close. Novak reached the ladder first and began to climb. I followed, every muscle protesting after the ordeal underground. Just as Novak reached the top and began to push against the cover, a single gunshot rang out. Novak cried out, her body jerking with the impact. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought she would fall, but she clung to the ladder with remarkable determination. "Go!" I urged, climbing faster to support her. "I'm right behind you." With extraordinary effort, Novak pushed the cover aside and dragged herself out onto the street above. I followed seconds later, helping to slide the heavy cover back into place just as flashlight beams appeared in the tunnel below. We were in a narrow service alley behind a row of jewelry workshops, the pre-dawn sky just beginning to lighten above us. Novak leaned heavily against a wall, one hand pressed to her side where blood seeped between her fingers. "How bad?" I asked, immediately moving to examine the wound. Through and through, she grimaced. "Lower right side. Missed anything vital, I think, but I'm losing blood." I pulled off my jacket and tore a strip from my shirt to create a makeshift pressure bandage. "We need to get you medical attention. No hospitals," she insisted. "They'll be watching." "I have a contact ex-military medic. Lives about half a mile from here." "Can you make it that far?" She nodded determinedly, though her face had paled considerably. "Have to. The evidence. What we found. It has to reach the right people." I supported her weight as we made our way cautiously through the quiet early morning streets, avoiding main roads and CCTV coverage as best we could. Novak directed us to a modest flat above a closed bookshop where she knocked in a distinctive pattern. The door opened to reveal a compact, muscular man with close-cropped gray hair and alert eyes that immediately assessed our condition. Inside, he ordered without preamble, "Quickly." Once inside, He helped Novak to a clean table that looked suspiciously prepared for exactly this kind of emergency. As he cut away her clothing to access the wound, he glanced at me. "Kelvin," he introduced himself simply. "You must be the detective she's been watching." "Shernan," I confirmed. "How bad is it?" "She's been luckier than she deserves," Kelvin replied, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. "Clean entry and exit. No major organs or arteries hit. She'll need antibiotics, fluids, and rest, but she'll recover." "No time for rest," Novak insisted, wincing as Kelvin applied antiseptic. "We have the evidence, but now they know we have it. They'll accelerate everything, the extractions, the demolitions, covering their tracks, and eliminating witnesses," I added, thinking of Jason Liang and the Glasgow incident. "We need to get this information to someone who can act on it, someone not compromised." "There's one person," Novak said as Kelvin began suturing her wound. "Director Ellen Fraser at MI5. Vincent vetted her before the Brickworks. She has no connections to Pentacor or any of their known associates. How do we reach her?" "I'm officially a fugitive now, and you're a ghost who's been presumed dead for 5 years. "That's where I come in," Kelvin interjected, finishing the last suture. "I still have contacts in intelligence circles. I can arrange a secure meeting." As Kelvin moved to a secure phone in the corner of the room, I sat beside Novak, finally allowing myself to process the night's discoveries and dangers. "Do you think we can trust Fraser?" I asked quietly. "After everything we've seen, how deep this goes, we don't have a choice," Novak replied, her voice steadier than I expected given her injury. "The evidence has to reach someone with the authority to act. And if we tried to go public directly, they'd discredit or eliminate us before we could present half of what we know." She was right, but the thought provided little comfort. We had uncovered a conspiracy of international proportions, identified strategic resources being stolen from beneath our city by foreign intelligence, and documented corruption reaching the highest levels of local governance and law enforcement. But proving it to those with the power to stop it meant trusting the very institutions that had been compromised. "Kelvin's arranged it," Novak continued, reading my expression accurately. "Fraser will meet us at a secure location in 3 hours. Until then, we need to organize what we have and prepare our presentation. We'll get one chance at this, Shernan, one opportunity to convince her before Pentacor realizes we've made contact." As we carefully compiled our evidence, the financial records, the surveillance documents, the photographs from the mineral reserve, the shipping manifests, I contemplated the extraordinary journey that had led to this moment. What had begun as a cold case investigation had unveiled a conspiracy spanning decades and continents. 4 innocent people had died for accidentally uncovering a small piece of this puzzle. How many others had been silenced over the years to protect this operation? More importantly, what would happen once we presented our evidence? Would justice finally be served, or would powerful forces find a way to bury the truth yet again? If you had uncovered a conspiracy of this magnitude, with evidence of foreign espionage on British soil and corruption throughout the institutions meant to protect citizens, would you trust those same institutions to address it? Or would you fear that the cancer had spread too far to be excised by conventional means? These questions weighed heavily as we prepared to meet Director Fraser, a meeting that would either begin the process of justice or seal our fates as the final victims of the Brickworks conspiracy. What I couldn't know then was that our carefully gathered evidence would reveal one final, devastating truth, one that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the case and force us to confront the darkest aspects of power, loyalty, and justice. The truth revealed. The safe house Kelvin arranged was a nondescript terraced house in the suburb of Moseley, far from the city center and the underground chambers we'd explored. Director Ellen Fraser arrived precisely on time, alone as promised, her unassuming appearance belying her position as one of the most powerful intelligence officials in the UK. Fraser was shorter than I'd expected, with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes that evaluated everything with clinical precision. She wore no obvious security or communication devices, a professional courtesy that acknowledged the sensitivity of our meeting. Detective Shernan, she greeted me with a firm handshake. Your reputation precedes you. 23 years of exemplary service, until you recently became a person of interest in an internal corruption investigation. Her tone made it clear she understood the true nature of that designation. She turned to Novak, her expression revealing nothing. And you must be Petra Novak, historical preservation consultant, presumed dead for nearly 5 years. I've been briefed on your background. By whom? Novak asked sharply, her injured side clearly causing pain despite Kelvin's medical attention. That's not relevant at present, Fraser replied smoothly. What matters is that I'm here, alone, ready to listen to what you've discovered. My presence should indicate a certain level of trust on my part. I hope for the same in return. For the next 2 hours, we presented our evidence methodically, laying out the entire conspiracy from beginning to end, the Victorian Mineral Reserve, Pentacor's true nature as a front for Russian intelligence, the corrupted officials, the murder of 4 people who had stumbled onto the operation, and the ongoing extraction of strategic resources from beneath Birmingham. Fraser listened without interruption, occasionally examining a document more closely or asking for clarification on specific points. Her composure never wavered, even as we revealed the extent of police corruption and the involvement of prominent civic leaders. When we finished, she sat silently for several moments, her gaze focused on something distant and invisible. What you've uncovered, she finally said, represents one of the most significant resource espionage operations on British soil in decades. The coordination, the patience, the strategic vision, it's quite extraordinary. Her clinical assessment carried no admiration, merely professional recognition of a well-executed intelligence operation. The question now, she continued, is how to proceed. This can't be addressed through normal channels. Too many institutions have been compromised, too many officials implicated. A conventional investigation would be sabotaged before it began. So what do you propose? I asked, studying her reaction carefully. A specialized team, Fraser replied immediately. Drawn from multiple agencies, vetted personally by me, with no connections to Birmingham or the Midlands. They'll secure the mineral reserve, document what remains, and identify all access points. Simultaneously, a separate counterintelligence unit will begin tracking the materials already extracted, using the shipping manifests you've provided. And the murders? Novak pressed. Vincent, Eliza, Darius, Marcus, they deserve justice. They'll have it, Fraser assured her. But we must approach this systematically. If we move against the wrong targets too early, evidence will disappear and key operatives will vanish. We need to dismantle the entire network, not just remove a few visible components. Her response was logical, professional, and exactly what an intelligence director should say. Yet something in her manner triggered a faint alarm in my detective's instincts. How quickly can you assemble this team? I asked, watching her closely. It's already being assembled, Fraser replied. I initiated preliminary protocols based on Kelvin's information before arriving. Full operational status within 12 hours. Again, a perfectly reasonable response, yet that subtle sense of unease persisted. I glanced at Novak and saw a similar wariness in her expression. There's something I don't understand, Director, Novak said carefully. How did Kelvin contact you so easily? An intelligence director isn't usually so accessible, even to former operatives. Kelvin and I have history, Fraser explained smoothly. From the Yugoslav conflicts in the 1990s, he knew how to reach me through secure channels. Kelvin, standing near the door, nodded in confirmation, but something in his posture had changed a tension that hadn't been there before. The pieces suddenly aligned in my mind. Fraser's two-perfect responses, her unsurprised reaction to our evidence, Kelvin's subtle shift in demeanor. Director Fraser, I said carefully, When exactly were you appointed to your position at MI5? If the question surprised her, she didn't show it. 4 years ago, after the retirement of Sir Adrian Templeton. And before that, where were you posted? A flicker of something annoyance. Concern crossed her features. Various departments. Counterterrorism, primarily, including any oversight of industrial espionage or resource security. Fraser's expression hardened slightly. Detective Shernan, while I appreciate your thoroughness, we have more urgent matters than my CV to discuss. I disagree, I replied, tension building in my chest. Because according to the files we found, Assistant Chief Constable Gardner reported to a handler identified only as Fraser as early as 6 years ago before your appointment at MI5. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Kelvin moved subtly, positioning himself between Fraser and the door. Novak's hand drifted toward her waistband, where I knew she kept a concealed weapon. You've misinterpreted something in those files, Fraser said, her voice maintaining its professional calm. Gardner reported to many officials during his career. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But there's an easy way to verify. The files mentioned a distinctive trait of this Fraser, a habit of tapping the third finger of the left hand when considering complex problems. I gestured to her hand, where her third finger was indeed tapping a steady rhythm against her thigh. A habit you've displayed consistently throughout our meeting. Fraser stilled her finger, her expression unchanged, but the air around her seeming to cool by several degrees. You're making a significant error in judgment, Detective, she said quietly. Am I? Or did we just hand our evidence to the very person who has been overseeing this operation from the British side? The moment stretched, taut with dangerous potential. Then Fraser smiled, a cold, appreciative expression devoid of warmth. Impressive deduction. Vincent Thorne nearly made the same connection 5 years ago. He was more circumspect about revealing it, however. The confirmation hit like a physical blow. This woman, this high-ranking intelligence official, had been involved in the murders we were trying to solve. You ordered their deaths, Novak stated flatly, her hand now visibly resting on the weapon in her waistband. I authorized a containment operation that unfortunately resulted in casualties, Fraser corrected with chilling precision. There's an important distinction. We hope to bring them into the operation. When that proved impossible, alternatives became necessary. 4 people murdered to protect what your career, your Russian paymasters? I demanded, disgust rising in my throat. Fraser's expression hardened. You still don't understand the larger picture, Detective. This isn't about personal enrichment or betraying national interests. This is about strategic resource management at the highest levels. Explain it then, I challenged. Before we turn this evidence over to someone who actually serves British interests. Fraser studied us both, making some internal calculation. Finally, she nodded. The mineral reserve operation isn't Russian espionage against Britain, she said calmly. It's a joint intelligence operation between our countries, authorized at the highest levels of both governments, but kept completely deniable. That's absurd, Novak objected immediately. Why would Britain allow strategic resources to be secretly extracted and shipped to Russia? Because these aren't just any resources, Fraser explained. The uranium ore stored in those chambers has a unique isotopic signature, one identical to samples found in certain Iranian nuclear facilities. The platinum and other metals match composition with materials used in North Korean missile components. She leaned forward, intensity breaking through her professional veneer. Do you understand what that means? These materials provide unambiguous fingerprints that can be used to track nuclear proliferation and sanctions violations. By controlling their distribution through Russian channels, we can trace exactly where unauthorized nuclear and missile components are being developed. The implications were staggering. You're telling me this entire operation, the property acquisitions, the corrupted officials, even the murders was to facilitate a covert international counterproliferation strategy? I asked incredulously. Precisely, Fraser confirmed. a strategy that has already prevented 3 dirty bomb components from reaching terrorist groups and identified 2 previously unknown nuclear development facilities in sanctioned countries. And that justifies murdering 4 innocent people? Novak demanded, her voice tight with anger. No death is ever fully justified, Fraser replied, showing the first hint of genuine emotion. But in intelligence operations of this scale, risk calculations must include potential civilian casualties. The 4 individuals you're concerned about had unknowingly assembled enough information to expose an operation that saves thousands of lives annually. The equation is brutal but clear. Why not just recruit them? I asked. Vincent, Eliza, Darius, Marcus, they were patriots. They could have been brought into the operation. That was the initial plan, Fraser acknowledged. But when Vincent contacted the National Crime Agency rather than following the proper intelligence channels, it created an uncontrollable variable. The decision was made at levels above mine to implement the containment protocol. Her explanation had a terrible logic to it. The cold equations of intelligence work where individual lives were balanced against strategic objectives, yet something still didn't align. If this is an officially sanctioned operation, I said slowly, why the elaborate corruption network? Why involve local criminals, bribe officials, create this entire shadow infrastructure? Why not simply classify the area and extract the materials openly? Fraser's expression changed subtly, a micro-expression of discomfort quickly suppressed. The operation required absolute deniability, she replied. Even within our own government, knowledge was compartmentalized. No, Novak interrupted, her analytical mind making the same connections I had. That's not it. If this were fully sanctioned, you'd use military personnel under diplomatic cover, not corrupt local officials and police. This operation has the infrastructure of an unsanctioned project. Fraser remained silent, her composure perfect, but her eyes revealing calculation. The truth suddenly dawned on me with crushing clarity. This started as a rogue operation, didn't it? You discovered the mineral reserve, recognized its value, and began extraction without official approval. When the strategic potential became clear, you brought in Russian partners who could move the materials without raising alarms. Only later, when the intelligence value was proven, did you secure retroactive approval from certain officials, Novak continued, following the same logic. But by then, you were committed to the corrupt infrastructure you'd built. You couldn't dismantle it without exposing the unsanctioned origins of the project. Fraser's silence confirmed our deduction. Eventually, she spoke, her voice quieter, but no less controlled. The initial discovery was made during routine historical research for urban development projects. I recognized the strategic potential immediately, but official channels would have required years of assessment, committee approvals, diplomatic negotiations, all while these critical materials sat unused. So yes, I initiated extraction operations using available resources. Available resources meaning corrupt officials and local criminals, I translated bluntly. I created a functioning intelligence operation with minimal oversight and maximum effectiveness, Fraser corrected. When the value was demonstrated, selected officials provided necessary approvals, and Russian intelligence offered partnership for distribution and tracking. The original methods became legacy infrastructure. Legacy infrastructure that murdered 4 people to protect itself, Novak said bitterly. An unfortunate necessity, Fraser replied, her composure finally showing cracks. The operation has prevented nuclear components from reaching terrorist organizations, identified sanctions violations that threatened European security, and provided intelligence value that has saved countless lives. 4 deaths, however regrettable, do not outweigh those benefits. The terrible calculus of her position hung in the room a moral equation that balanced 4 murders against thousands of lives potentially saved by the intelligence gathered through this corrupt operation. What happens now? I asked, the weight of this revelation settling heavily. You can't simply eliminate us like you did the others. too many people know we're investigating. No, I can't, Fraser acknowledged. But I can offer you something more valuable than vengeance for 4 deaths that can't be undone. I can offer you purpose. Purpose? Novak repeated skeptically. Join the operation officially, Fraser proposed. Both of you. Your skills are exceptional. Your moral compass clearly functional, if rigid. Help us manage this resource properly, ensure no more unnecessary deaths occur, and maximize the intelligence value that justifies the cost. The offer was as unexpected as it was calculating coped us rather than eliminate us. Make us complicit in the very operation we had sought to expose. And if we refuse, I asked, already knowing the answer, then the evidence you've gathered will unfortunately be discredited. Detective Shernan will be framed as a corrupt officer who murdered his former colleague, Detective Sergeant Mercer, during an internal affairs investigation. Ms. BVS. Novak will simply disappear again, this time permanently. Your deaths won't serve justice for Vincent, Eliza, Darius, or Marcus. They'll simply add to the tally of necessary casualties. The clinical way she outlined our fates sent ice through my veins. This wasn't a threat delivered in anger. It was a simple statement of operational procedure from someone accustomed to making such decisions. You're asking us to betray everything we've been fighting for, Novak said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. To collaborate with the very system that murdered our friends. I'm asking you to transcend simplistic moral frameworks and participate in work that matters on a global scale, Fraser countered. Your friends' deaths were tragic, but necessary given their actions. Future deaths need not be with proper management. I looked at Novak, seeing my own ethical struggle reflected in her eyes. The pragmatic choice was clear. Join Fraser's operation, survive, perhaps even influence it from within to prevent further necessary casualties. The moral choice seemed equally clear. Refuse, likely die, and have all our evidence discredited. But there was a third option, one that Fraser, for all her calculation, might not have considered. We need time to discuss this, I said carefully. This isn't a decision to make immediately. Fraser studied me, clearly searching for deception. You have until tomorrow morning. My team will secure the evidence you've gathered in the meantime as a show of good faith. And if we agree to join your operation, Novak asked, what guarantees do we have for our safety? The same guarantee I have for mine, mutual assured destruction, Fraser replied with cold logic. We would know too much about each other for betrayal to be viable for either party. As Fraser stood to leave, I asked one final question. Was there ever any consideration of sparing them? Vincent, Eliza, Darius, Marcus, did you even try to find another way? For the first time, something like regret flickered across Fraser's features. Vincent was offered recruitment first. He refused, believing his evidence should go through official channels. Once he made that choice, the others became part of the same security breach. Containment protocols don't allow for partial implementation. With that chilling justification for 4 murders, Fraser departed, leaving us with an impossible choice: collaborate with a system we had fought to expose, or refuse and likely become its next victims. As the door closed behind her, Kelvin moved from his position near the wall. We need to move quickly, he said in a low voice. This safe house is compromised. You knew, didn't you? Novak accused, her hand still resting on her concealed weapon. You knew who Fraser really was when you contacted her. I suspected, Kelvin admitted, but I needed confirmation before I could help you properly. Help us? I repeated incredulously. You've just delivered us to the architect of the very conspiracy we've been trying to expose. No, Kelvin replied firmly. I've exposed the architect to you while alerting others who need to know. Fraser isn't the only high-level intelligence officer with an interest in this case. He pressed a button on what appeared to be a standard wristwatch. Our conversation has been transmitted to 3 separate secure locations. Fraser's admission regarding the unsanctioned origins of the operation and the authorized murders of British citizens on British soil has been recorded and distributed. The realization of what Kelvin had done hit me with equal parts hope and terror. You've been working against Fraser all along. Let's just say there are competing interests within the intelligence community regarding unauthorized operations and unilateral decisions to eliminate civilians, Kelvin replied carefully. Fraser's methods have concerned certain parties for years, but evidence was lacking. Until now. So we were bait, Novak observed, a grudging respect in her voice. Strategic assets in an intelligence operation, Kelvin corrected with the ghost of a smile. Sound familiar? The irony wasn't lost on me. We had been unwittingly used in exactly the same way Fraser had used others. The difference was our survival remained part of Kelvin's plan. We need to leave now, Kelvin insisted, already gathering our evidence files. Fraser will realize the trap within hours, if not sooner. Her containment protocols will be activated immediately. Where do we go? I asked, the world having shifted beneath my feet once again. Who exactly are you working for? For now, you don't need to know, Kelvin replied pragmatically. But unlike Fraser, my employers believe that murdering British citizens to cover unauthorized operations crosses a line that intelligence services cannot cross without accountability. As we hurriedly prepared to abandon the safe house, I contemplated the layers of deception, the competing agendas, and the moral compromises that define this world of shadows. What had begun as a search for justice for 4 murder victims had exposed a conspiracy more complex and ethically ambiguous than I could have imagined. If you discovered that an operation responsible for murder was also saving countless lives, where would you draw the line? Would you join it to reform from within? Fight it regardless of the consequences? Or find some middle path that honored both justice and pragmatism? These questions accompanied us as we slipped away into the gathering darkness, fleeing from one intelligence faction toward another, carrying evidence that could topple careers, change policies, and perhaps, finally, bring a measure of justice for 4 people who had died for knowing too much about the shadows beneath Birmingham. What I couldn't know then was that the final resolution would come not in courtrooms or intelligence briefings, but in another confrontation deep beneath the city, a confrontation that would force each of us to make our final choice between justice, pragmatism, and survival. Resolution and moral reckoning. 72 hours after our meeting with Fraser, we found ourselves in a secure facility deep within GCHQ Cheltenham, Britain's Signals Intelligence Headquarters. Kelvin's competing interests had materialized in the form of Deputy Director Malcolm Hayes, a veteran intelligence officer with impeccable credentials and, crucially, no connection to Fraser's unauthorized operations. Hayes was everything Fraser was not transparent in his intentions, explicit about limitations, and openly disturbed by the revelation that British intelligence had authorized the murder of British citizens on British soil. What Fraser described as containment protocols violated at least 15 laws and operational guidelines, Hayes explained, as we sat in a secure briefing room. Even in matters of highest national security, we have established procedures for handling security breaches that don't include execution without trial. For 3 days, we had been debriefed extensively, our evidence analyzed by multiple specialists, and our testimony corroborated against existing intelligence. The picture that emerged confirmed our worst suspicions while adding new dimensions of complexity. Fraser's operation began unsanctioned, as you deduced, Hayes confirmed. However, when the intelligence value became apparent, she secured partial retroactive authorization from specific officials, bypassing normal oversight. Those officials are now being questioned. And the murders? Novak pressed, her wound healing, but her determination to secure justice undiminished. Will there be accountability? Hayes's expression was grave. There will be, but not in the way you might expect. Fraser's position and the sensitive nature of the operation make conventional prosecution problematic. The intelligence value of the mineral reserve operation is genuine, despite its corrupt origins and methods. So, she walks free, I concluded bitterly. 4 people murdered and no consequences. I didn't say that, Hayes corrected firmly. Fraser has been removed from operational control and placed under house arrest pending a closed intelligence tribunal. The mineral reserve operation is being reconstructed under proper protocols, with all corrupt elements removed. The intelligence stream will continue, but legally and ethically. It was something, but far less than the justice Vincent, Eliza, Darius, and Marcus deserved. What happens to us now? I asked, still unsure of our status witnesses, assets, or potential liabilities. That's partly why we're meeting today, Hayes replied. Fraser has been contained, but some of her operational team remains active. Most concerning is Alan Mercer, who vanished when Fraser was detained. As the operational lead for the Brickworks killings, he represents both a security threat and a potential source of comprehensive evidence. You want us to help you find him, Novak deduced immediately. Yes, Hayes acknowledged without pretense. You both know this case more intimately than anyone alive. Mercer will be following established contingency protocols, but he may deviate in ways our intelligence can't predict, but your experience might anticipate. The request made tactical sense, but I was hesitant to re-enter the field so quickly after everything we'd uncovered. What's your interest in Mercer specifically? There must be dozens of corrupt officials involved in this operation. Hayes exchanged glances with Kelvin before responding. Mercer carries something Fraser called operational insurance, detailed records of the entire conspiracy, including officials involved, Russian partnerships, and crucially, recordings of the authorization for the Brickworks killings. If he reaches his Russian contacts with this material, it creates a diplomatic incident that would prevent us from properly resolving this situation. And by properly resolving, you mean what exactly? Novak asked skeptically. Justice for the victims, prosecution where possible without compromising national security, and restructuring of the mineral reserve operation under legitimate protocols, Hayes specified. Mercer's evidence is the key to all 3 objectives. It was the closest to justice we were likely to get, not perfect, not complete, but better than the alternative of Fraser's crimes being buried in the name of national security. We believe Mercer has returned to Birmingham, Kelvin added. Specifically, to access a secure cache in the mineral reserve tunnels before his extraction by Russian assets. When? I asked, already mentally mapping the underground network we had partially explored. Tonight, Hayes replied. Our intelligence suggests he'll enter through the access point in the Chambers building before its scheduled demolition tomorrow. The same access point we used, I noted. He's following our trail. With one significant advantage, Kelvin pointed out. He knows the tunnel network intimately after years of operations. We only have Petra's historical maps and your limited exploration. The mission was taking shape in my mind: intercept Mercer in the tunnels, secure his operational insurance, and finally acquire the definitive evidence needed to bring a measure of justice for the Brickworks victims. If we do this, Novak said carefully, we need guarantees. The evidence Mercer holds must be used to its fullest extent to secure justice, not selectively applied to protect certain officials or relationships. Hayes studied her with newfound respect. Within the constraints of national security, you have my word. The tribunal will see all relevant evidence regarding the murders and unauthorized operations. It wasn't everything we wanted, but it was more than we could have hoped for 3 days ago when Fraser had calmly explained why murdering 4 people had been necessary. One more thing, I added. When this is over, regardless of the outcome, we need the truth about Vincent, Eliza, Darius, and Marcus to reach their families. Not every detail, perhaps, but enough for them to know their loved ones weren't criminals or random victims. They died trying to expose corruption. Their families deserve that truth. Hayes considered this request carefully before nodding. A sanitized version can be provided to the families. They deserve closure. With those terms established, we spent the next several hours preparing for the operation. Tactical maps of the tunnel network were developed using Novak's historical knowledge and satellite ground-penetrating radar. Communication devices, weapons, and specialized equipment for the underground environment were issued and explained. By nightfall, we were back in Birmingham, positioned near the Chambers building with a small elite team of intelligence operatives. The demolition equipment surrounding the building provided convenient cover for our surveillance and entry preparations. Mercer will likely arrive between midnight and 2 a.m., the tactical lead explained. Minimal security presence, maximum darkness. We'll establish perimeter control but allow him to enter the tunnels unopposed. You're using him to lead us to the cache, I observed. Precisely. Once he's accessed it, we move in and extract both Mercer and the evidence. The plan was sound in theory, but I had worked enough high-stakes operations to know that perfect plans rarely survived contact with reality. Novak, standing beside me in tactical gear that somehow looked natural on the historical preservationist, seemed to share my concern. Mercer won't be alone, she predicted quietly. He'll have backup, either local assets or Russian operatives positioned to assist his extraction. Agreed, I replied. And he knows these tunnels better than we do. We're at a disadvantage if this turns into a pursuit situation. As midnight approached, our surveillance detected movement at the perimeter of the demolition site, a single figure moving with professional caution toward the building's rear entrance. The same entrance Novak and I had used days earlier. Target confirmed, the surveillance operator announced. Facial recognition matches Mercer. He's alone, but scanning actively for surveillance. Hold positions, the tactical lead ordered. Let him enter the tunnels. Alpha Team will secure the entrance once he's inside. We watched on thermal imaging as Mercer breached the building and made his way to the basement level. Once he disappeared below ground, beyond our sensors' reach, the tactical team moved swiftly to secure the entrance while preparing for our underground pursuit. Remember, we need him alive and the evidence intact, Hayes emphasized over our secure communication system from his remote command position. This isn't about revenge, it's about justice and accountability. The distinction felt academic as we descended the same stone steps Novak and I had used days before, entering the underground world where this conspiracy had flourished for years. The weight of 4 murders and the possibility of finally securing evidence to bring their killers to justice pressed down on me like the earth above these Victorian tunnels. Our tactical team moved efficiently through the initial tunnel toward the main distribution hub, night vision equipment revealing the path clearly despite the absolute darkness. Novak moved with surprising confidence for someone recovering from a gunshot wound, her determination evident in every controlled movement. Upon reaching the main hub chamber, our team leader signaled for silence. Faint echoes could be heard from one of the deeper tunnels, the different sound of metal tools against stone or metal. He's accessing something in the lower levels, Novak whispered. Not the chamber we explored before, something deeper. The tactical leader studied the tunnel map before indicating a narrow passage marked as administrative sector on the Victorian plans. This route should bring us above his position. Move silent. Night vision only until my signal. We proceeded carefully down the indicated passage, descending deeper beneath Birmingham through tunnels that had likely not seen human presence in a century before Pentacor's operations. The air grew colder, the space tighter, until we emerged into what appeared to be a Victorian-era underground office complex, a series of small chambers with rotting wooden desks and filing cabinets. From below, the sounds grew clearer. Mercer was in a chamber directly beneath us, the flooring between us thin enough that his voice occasionally carried through. Confirmation of access, we heard him say, presumably speaking into a communication device. Extracting the package now. Rendezvous at Checkpoint Delta in 30 minutes. Our tactical leader signaled the team to deploy, indicating a stairwell that would lead down to Mercer's position. We moved into place, weapons ready, preparing to descend. What happened next occurred with devastating speed. As our point operative placed his foot on the first step, a prepositioned explosive charge detonated, collapsing the stairwell in a deafening roar and cloud of Victorian dust and debris. Ambush. The team leader shouted as gunfire erupted from multiple positions around the administrative section. "Take cover!" We scattered for protection as bullets impacted the ancient brickwork around us. This was no lone operative. Mercer had a full tactical team in place, clearly anticipating our pursuit. He knew we were coming, Novak said grimly as we sheltered behind an overturned metal desk. This was a trap. The firefight intensified, with precision fire from at least 5 positions keeping us pinned, while Mercer presumably secured his evidence cache below. Our tactical team returned fire professionally, but the confined space and superior positioning of Mercer's team gave them a clear advantage. "We need to reach Mercer," I insisted, identifying a potential route through a partially collapsed section of wall that might bypass the firefight and reach the level below. "The evidence is what matters." Novak nodded in agreement, and we communicated our plan to the team leader, who reluctantly approved while maintaining the engagement to cover our movement. We slipped through the gap in the wall, finding ourselves in a narrow maintenance shaft similar to the one we had escaped through days earlier. This shaft descended at a steep angle, requiring careful navigation in the darkness. "Below us is what the Victorian plans labeled as the secure archives," Novak whispered as we descended. "If Mercer placed his insurance cache anywhere, that would be the logical location." The shaft eventually opened into a narrow corridor lined with heavy iron doors, a Victorian version of secure storage. Most doors hung open, their contents long since removed, but one at the far end was illuminated by the beam of a powerful flashlight. There, working methodically to open a modern safe embedded in the Victorian brickwork, stood Alan Mercer. We approached silently, weapons raised, using the numerous storage alcoves for cover. Mercer was so focused on the safe that he didn't notice our approach until we were less than 10 meters away. "It's over, Mercer," I called, my weapon trained on his center mass. "Step away from the safe." Mercer froze but didn't turn, his hands still on the safe's combination dial. "Detective Shernan," he replied, his voice unnervingly calm. "And Ms. Novak, I presume? I wondered if you'd survived our last encounter." "Hands where we can see them," Novak ordered, moving to create a crossfire position. "Now." Slowly, Mercer raised his hands and turned to face us. Unlike the professional killer who had hunted me through the safe house, he now looked exhausted, his eyes holding the resignation of a man who had run out of contingencies. "My team upstairs will eliminate your colleagues within minutes," he stated without emotion. "Then they'll come for you. This was never a situation you could win, Detective. Your team is outmatched," I responded, hoping it was true. "GCHQ has this entire area under surveillance. Reinforcements are already deploying." Something flickered in Mercer's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or calculation of new odds. "Fraser sent you to recover her insurance policy," Novak deduced, her weapon unwavering. "But she's already in custody. The operation is being dismantled." "You're fighting for a cause that's already lost. Is that what they told you?" Mercer asked, a grim smile forming. "That Fraser is in custody and justice will be served? That the mineral reserve operation will be properly managed going forward?" He laughed bitterly. "You're more naive than I expected from your records." "Open the safe," I ordered, ignoring his attempt to sow doubt. Slowly. Mercer studied us both, then shrugged. "Why not? The contents won't mean what you think anyway." He turned back to the safe, carefully manipulated the combination, and swung open the heavy door. Inside was a single waterproof case, which he removed and placed on a nearby ledge. The infamous operational insurance, Mercer announced with theatrical flair. Everything Fraser needed to protect herself from prosecution or elimination. Names, dates, recordings, authorizations, the complete history of the mineral reserve operation from unsanctioned beginning to present. "Step back," I instructed, moving forward to secure the case while Novak kept her weapon trained on Mercer. "Before you celebrate your victory, Detective," Mercer said as he complied, "you should know what you're actually holding. It's not just evidence against Fraser." I kept my attention divided between Mercer and the case, not allowing his words to distract me. Whatever it contains will be presented to the tribunal, all of it, including the direct authorization from Deputy Director Hayes for the Brickworks operation. Mercer asked, his words hitting like a physical blow, including his signed directive that the 4 targets were to be eliminated rather than recruited due to their civilian connections. My hands paused on the case. "You're lying. Hayes is dismantling Fraser's operation. He's the one who removed her from command. Hayes removed Fraser because she became a liability, not because he opposed the operation," Mercer countered. "He was her superior from the beginning, the one who authorized her initial unsanctioned exploration, who approved the transition to Russian partnership, who personally signed off on the Brickworks containment protocol." I looked to Novak, whose expression reflected my own internal struggle, desperate to dismiss Mercer's claims as manipulation, yet professional enough to recognize they might contain truth. "Open the case," Novak said quietly, her weapon still trained on Mercer. "We need to know." With careful movements, I unlocked the waterproof case and raised the lid. Inside were multiple flash drives, hard copy documents, and a digital recorder. The topmost document bore the unmistakable signature of Deputy Director Malcolm Hayes beneath text authorizing terminal containment measures for 4 named individuals: Vincent, Eliza, Darius, and Marcus. The date was 2 days before the Brickworks killings. "This doesn't make sense," I insisted, though the evidence was literal in my hands. "Hayes is the one who promised justice, who authorized this operation to capture you. Because I have this," Mercer explained, gesturing to the case. Fraser wasn't the only one who believed in insurance policies. When I realized the operation was being reframed and scapegoats identified, I secured my own protection. Hayes used us, Novak realized, her voice tight, with controlled fury. He needed us to lead him to this evidence so he could bury it completely. The firefight above had diminished, suggesting either our tactical team had gained the advantage or, more worryingly, Mercer's team had prevailed and would soon be heading our way. "What's your play here, Mercer?" I asked, needing to understand his endgame. "If Hayes betrayed you both, why not release this evidence publicly? Why the rendezvous with Russian assets?" "Because vengeance against Hayes doesn't protect me from prosecution for 4 murders," Mercer replied with cold logic. "My Russian colleagues, however, offer a comfortable retirement beyond British jurisdiction in exchange for my expertise and the complete operational details contained there." The moral calculus had shifted yet again. The man before us had personally overseen the murder of 4 innocent people. He deserved justice, prosecution, imprisonment. But he also held evidence proving that the very officials promising justice for those murders had actually authorized them. "If Hayes gets this evidence, it disappears forever," Novak said, articulating my thoughts. "Vincent, Eliza, Darius, Marcus, their murders become a state secret, never acknowledged, their killers never held accountable. And if Mercer escapes with it to Russia, the evidence becomes an intelligence weapon to be used selectively against British interests, still never bringing true justice," I added. Mercer watched this exchange with clinical interest. The classic moral dilemma of intelligence work, isn't it? No clean options, only competing compromises. From above, the sound of movement in the stairwell suggested someone was clearing the debris to reach our position. Whether friend or foe remained unclear. We had moments to decide our course of action. "There is another option," I said quietly to Novak. "With that evidence, we could bypass Hayes entirely. Go directly to the Attorney General, specific journalists, create too many distribution points for it to be contained. Go public with the whole conspiracy," Novak agreed, understanding immediately. "Not through intelligence channels that can be manipulated, but through institutions Hayes doesn't control. Mercer's expression changed, his composure cracking for the first time. That wasn't one of the options I outlined. No, it wasn't, I agreed, turning my full attention back to him. Because it's the one option where you don't win. Either escape to Russia or immunity for testimony. Those were your binary choices. We're introducing a third path where justice comes before agency politics or personal survival. The sounds from above grew louder. Whoever was clearing the debris would break through within minutes. You'll never make it out with that evidence, Mercer warned, desperation entering his voice. Hayes has resources you can't imagine. Contingencies for contingencies. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But we don't need to escape with the physical evidence. I nodded to Novak, who produced a small device from her tactical vest, a specialized scanner provided by Kelvin for documenting the underground chambers. We've been digitizing everything since you opened the safe, Novak explained, displaying the device's screen where document pages were being rapidly processed and transmitted. Kelvin has the recipient's selected individuals outside Hayes' influence, each receiving partial data that becomes meaningful only when combined. Mercer's face contorted with fury as he realized his leverage was evaporating. In a sudden, desperate movement, he lunged for a backup weapon concealed at his ankle. Both Novak and I fired simultaneously. Our bullets struck with surgical precision, and Alan Mercer, detective sergeant, murderer, intelligence operative, collapsed to the Victorian brick floor, his final expression one of shocked miscalculation. In the moment of ringing silence that followed, Novak continued systematically scanning the case contents while I secured Mercer's weapon and confirmed his death. Transmission complete, she announced just as the debris in the stairwell was cleared and tactical team members began descending toward our position. Multiple recipients confirmed. The tactical leader reached us first, taking in the scene with professional assessment. Target is down. Evidence secure? Evidence secured and distributed, I confirmed, making eye contact with Novak to ensure our stories aligned. Multiple copies have been created as insurance against any attempt to bury the truth. The team leader's expression remained neutral, but something in his posture suggested he understood the subtext and perhaps even approved. Deputy Director Hayes is waiting for a status update. Tell him the operation was successful, I replied carefully. Mercer was killed resisting capture, but all evidence has been secured exactly as it should be. As the tactical team secured the scene and prepared for extraction, Novak and I shared a moment of silent understanding. We had entered this investigation seeking justice for 4 murdered innocents. What we had found instead was a conspiracy so deeply rooted in the institutions of power that conventional justice was impossible. Yet through our actions, the distributed evidence, the multiple recipients, the insurance against burial or manipulation, we had ensured that someone would be held accountable. The truth would emerge, perhaps not all at once, perhaps not in the clean resolution we had hoped for, but inexorably, as truth tends to do when enough people are determined to reveal it. In the days that followed, the consequences of our decision became apparent. Hayes was retired abruptly during a departmental restructuring. Fraser faced a closed tribunal that resulted in her permanent removal from intelligence services. Several officials connected to the Brickworks authorization resigned for personal reasons. Most importantly, the families of Vincent, Eliza, Darius, and Marcus received formal communications acknowledging that their loved ones had died in service to their country, exposing corruption at significant personal risk. Financial compensation was arranged, along with personal letters of commendation from the Home Secretary. It wasn't perfect justice. The full truth of the conspiracy, the Russian connection, the mineral reserve, the intelligence value derived from the stolen materials remained classified at the highest levels. The public would never know the complete story of what had happened beneath Birmingham's streets. But Novak and I knew. We carried that knowledge as both burden and vindication as we were quietly reassigned myself to a prestigious position with the National Crime Agency's Anti-Corruption Unit. Novak to a newly created role preserving and documenting historical infrastructure with national security implications. Both positions carefully crafted to keep us within the system, valued but monitored. Too knowledgeable to discard, too dangerous to fully trust. In our final private meeting before taking these new roles, Novak and I returned to the cafe near the jewelry quarter where we had stopped during our escape from the tunnels. "Do you think we made the right choice?" I asked as we watched raindrops trace patterns on the window pane. Distributing the evidence rather than controlling its release ourselves? "I think we made the only choice that ensured some measure of truth would survive," Novak replied after careful consideration. Perfect justice was never an option in a system this compromised. And the mineral reserve operation? It continues under proper protocols now. With legitimate oversight and without civilian casualties, she noted. The intelligence value was real, Shernan. That part wasn't fabrication. Those materials are helping track nuclear proliferation and sanctions violations. So the ends justify the means, after all. I challenged gently. Novak's expression hardened. Never. Vincent, Eliza, Darius, Marcus. Their murders were unforgivable crimes, regardless of the strategic context. What we've done is ensure a middle path accountability for those responsible without destroying intelligence capabilities that save lives. She was right, of course. In the gray world between absolute justice and pragmatic compromise, we had navigated as best we could, honoring the dead while recognizing the complex reality of national security operations. There will be other conspiracies, I reflected. Other instances where power corrupts and civilians become necessary casualties in someone's strategic calculation. And there will be other detectives, like you, Novak countered. Other witnesses willing to risk everything for truth. That's the eternal balance, isn't it? As we parted ways that day, heading toward our separate but connected futures within the system we had partially reformed, I carried with me the weight of all we had uncovered and all we had done in response. If you discovered a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of power, where justice was imperfect but truth still mattered, what would you do? Would you compromise your principles for the greater good, stand firm regardless of consequences, or find some middle path through the moral labyrinth? These questions have no universal answers, only individual responses shaped by conscience, circumstance, and courage. My answer was written in the evidence we distributed, the accountability we forced, and the partial justice we secured for 4 people who died trying to expose corruption beneath Birmingham's streets. Their story incomplete, imperfect, but true would not be forgotten. Not by me, not by those who received our evidence, and not by the institutions that would forever bear the scars of having their darkest operations exposed to unwelcome light. In the end, that was the best justice I could deliver as Detective Shernan, specialist in the unsolvable seeker of truths buried in the shadows of power. Closing words. Thank you for joining me tonight for another journey into the shadows of crime and justice. The Brickworks case remains one of the most complex investigations of my career, one that forced me to confront not just criminals, but the very institutions sworn to uphold justice. If there's one lesson I've learned from cases like this, it's that moral clarity is often the first casualty of power. Systems designed to protect can become corrupted when accountability fails. Yet there are always those willing to risk everything to expose truth, people like Vincent, Eliza, Darius, and Marcus, whose courage cost them their lives but ultimately sparked the change that brought partial justice to their memory. I ask you to consider, what would you do if you discovered corruption in the institutions you trusted? Would you look away for an easier life, or would you stand firm regardless of the personal cost? These aren't abstract questions. They're choices many people face in different forms throughout their lives. Protect your loved ones by sharing this story with them. Help them understand that moral courage isn't always rewarded, but it's always necessary for justice to prevail. If you found value in tonight's account, Please subscribe to the Shernin channel for more investigations into cases that powerful interests would prefer remained closed. Your support helps ensure these stories reach those who need to hear them most. Until next time, remember that the greatest threat to justice isn't always those who break the law. It's those with the power to decide which laws matter and which can be broken in service to greater purposes. Question everything, even when the answers prove uncomfortable. This is Detective Shernin, signing off.